Hatred doesn't always scream. It doesn't always break things or shout insults across a room. It doesn't always come with dramatic exits or loud confrontations. Sometimes it arrives in silence, disguised behind a polite smile, a friendly tone, or a gentle touch. Sometimes hatred lives quietly in the eyes of someone you thought you could trust. It might be a friend, a family member, or someone you share your everyday life with. They don't lash out. They don't make it obvious. Instead, they stay close, but not sincerely. What you see on the surface seems like affection, but your intuition keeps whispering that something is off. It's not what they say. It's how you feel in their presence. It's as if their energy slowly drains yours. You walk away from the conversation, feeling smaller, weaker, slightly off balance, even though they were kind. You try to shake the feeling, but it lingers. Carl Jung's deep psychological insights remind us that the shadow doesn't only dwell in what we refuse to see in ourselves, it also lives in what others refuse to confront in themselves, especially when they unconsciously project it onto you. Many people walk around wounded, unaware of the shadow they carry, and when someone shines light, your light, they feel threatened. Not because you did something wrong, but because your growth exposes what they haven't faced in themselves. That's when silent hatred is born, not out of your actions, but from what your presence symbolizes to them. They won't admit it, they won't express it, but if you pay close attention, you'll feel it. One of the first signs is this: they compliment you with words, but contradict themselves through their actions. They'll be there when you achieve something, but their energy won't match their words. They say, "I'm happy for you," but their eyes look away. They clap, but there's no real excitement in it. They speak kindly, but their tone is flat. Their words carry subtle doubts, quiet comparisons, or soft little buts that undermine your achievement. This isn't just momentary jealousy. It's not the passing envy we all feel sometimes. No, this is deeper. It's persistent. It's a quiet, calculated energy of minimization dressed up as affection. They don't confront you or start arguments. They chip away at your confidence in subtle, insidious ways. You might hear, "I'm so proud of you," followed by a pause or a lukewarm expression that leaves you feeling off. It's as if your success reminds them of everything they've left undone, and instead of being inspired by your progress, they feel diminished by it. They might say they admire you, but they never lift you higher. They hold you back gently, almost lovingly. They remind you not to get ahead of yourself. Don't get too excited, they say. Everyone has their moment. At first, it seems like wisdom, but over time, you find yourself sharing less and less. You stop telling them about your joys, your breakthroughs, your quiet victories. Why? Because every time you do, something goes cold, something disconnects. They don't block your light directly. They try to dim it from the shadows. That's the most painful sign. When someone pretends to celebrate your light while secretly trying to extinguish it. Over time, their responses become predictable, polite, but empty. They say the right things, but nothing feels real. Their eyes lack warmth. Their smile is rehearsed. You feel like you're speaking into a void where joy should echo back, but doesn't. Instead of rejoicing with you, they seem to be managing themselves around you, masking something they don't want you to see. So you stop. You pull back. You hesitate before sharing your happiness. And that's the tragedy, because you once trusted this person. You once believed they were safe. But now, every conversation feels heavy, like something unseen is always hovering between you. They never say anything hurtful outright. But what hurts is the absence of genuine support, of emotional presence, of authentic connection. They might change the subject suddenly, or offer praise with a twist. That's great, but I knew someone who did it faster. Or they point out some irrelevant flaw. That's cool, but let's see if you can keep it up. These small remarks add up. Each one, on its own, might seem harmless, but together they form a pattern of emotional erosion that wears down your self-worth in invisible ways. The hardest part? This person may have once truly supported you. At one point, their presence may have uplifted you. But now, something inside them has shifted. Your growth threatens something unhealed within them. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your progress casts a light on the parts of themselves they still avoid. And instead of using that light to awaken, they recoil, they shrink from it. And because they can't admit that, not even to themselves, they stay close. But not to help, to hold you back, quietly. It doesn't show up in fights. It doesn't show up in dramatic scenes. It lives in long silences, in the absence of joy, in mechanical replies that carry no soul. And you, having learned to trust your intuition, can no longer ignore it. You feel it. You know that something's no longer aligned, that their affection, once warm and free, now feels conditional, muted, fake. That's when you realize something essential. Real love doesn't compete. It doesn't compare. It doesn't calculate. Real affection celebrates with you simply because it's happy for you, not because it needs to keep score. Real closeness lifts you without dragging itself down. And when someone close to you can't do that, when your light causes discomfort they try to hide under polite words, it's time to listen. Not just to what they say, but to what you feel, because energy never lies. And even when truth is buried under layers of pleasantries, it always speaks to the soul. Sign 2. They only seek you out when they need something, but vanish when you need them. There's a pattern that repeats with quiet precision. That person reaches out, calls, gets close, but almost always with a hidden agenda. It's not genuine affection. It's usefulness. They need something from you, even if they don't say it outright. And when you're doing well, when your energy is high, when you're able to give, they're suddenly available, attentive, and present. But the moment you go through a low, when you need just a bit of support, they disappear. They change the subject. They ignore your pain. They don't know how to stay unless there's something to take. This type of relationship appears normal on the surface. It may even seem like there's love, but if you look closely, you'll notice the lack of reciprocity. When you share something difficult, they shift the attention back to themselves or offer phrases that sound comforting, but are actually emotional distance disguised as, "Well, we all have bad days," or "Cheer up, it'll pass." There's no true presence, no space for your vulnerability, only selective interest. The shadow in this kind of bond reveals itself in how you're reduced to what you can give. Your feelings don't matter, your usefulness does, and that, even if unspoken, is felt deep in the skin. Because there's no listening, no holding, no real intimacy, only need, only conditional presence. At first, you might excuse it, say they're busy, they have their own problems, or they don't want to bother you. And maybe that's partly true. But over time, you begin to see the pattern. They always have energy to show up when they need something, and never when you simply need to be. You start to notice a kind of calculation behind every approach, as if their affection had a price tag, as if their presence only activated when there was something to gain. It's a strange feeling to be near someone who says they value you, but doesn't know how to be with you when you're not shining. They only see you as useful when you can support, when you can fix, when you can listen. But if you fall, if you break, if you're unavailable, suddenly they don't know what to do with you. They grow uncomfortable. They pull away. They minimize your pain. And that's not love, not friendship, not real connection. That's dependency disguised as closeness. That's use, not care. And you, with your big heart, you've allowed it more than once. You've been there when you had nothing left to give. You've replied to messages on days when you couldn't even reply to yourself. You've kept conversations going when your body begged for rest. But something in you stayed because you thought that's what love meant. But that giving never came back. Not when you truly needed it. And not because they forgot, but because in that relationship, the flow only moves in one direction. Over time, you begin to feel drained. A quiet sadness settles in. Because deep down, you know your presence is being measured, not cherished. You realize that when you need comfort, that person doesn't vanish by accident. They vanish because they don't know what to do with your humanity. They only knew how to deal with your energy when you were fixing something for them, when you were a source of relief, when you nourished them, but not when you needed to be nourished. And that is one of the most silent forms of hidden hatred. When someone close feels entitled to take everything good you offer, but never sees that you're human too, that you fall too, that you feel too. Deep down, there's a projected shadow. They get uncomfortable seeing you vulnerable because it confronts everything they don't want to see in themselves. It bothers them that you're not always light, because they only knew how to extract brightness from you, not accompany you in the dark. That constant imbalance is not love. It's a bond built on emptiness. And when you finally recognize it, when you stop justifying their absence, when you clearly see that you're not a well they can drink from endlessly without ever giving anything in return, you realize that this too is a sign, not obvious, not spoken, but deeply real. Someone who only needs you when you shine doesn't love you. They consume you. And that energy, even if it comes from someone close, is a disguised form of rejection. A veiled way of saying, I only want you when I don't truly need you. That kind of bond leaves you with a growing sense of emptiness, not because of what you receive, but because of what doesn't happen when you stop giving. Eventually, you begin to expect the disappointment. You know that if something breaks in your life, if you experience loss, a fall, a dark moment, you can't count on that person. Not because they lack time, but because they're emotionally unavailable. Their presence depends on your usefulness, not your existence. And that, even if unsaid, hurts. It hurts deeply, because your heart remembers every time you were there for them. It remembers your effort, your availability, your care. And when faced with repeated absence, something in you begins to close. You no longer trust the same way. You don't open the same way. Because through pain, you've learned that in that space, you can't be your whole self. That you're only allowed to show your functional, strong, radiant side. But your fragility has no place. Your silence makes them uncomfortable. Your sadness is ignored. The energy in this type of relationship is asymmetrical. You give from the soul, but what you receive is a simulation of affection, a conditional presence. And the more conscious you become, the more you notice. Because what begins to hurt more is not what happens, but what doesn't happen. You begin to feel the emotional void more than the lack of words. And that's a clear sign. The soul knows when it's alone, even when the body is accompanied. And so, you begin to ask new questions, not out of anger, but out of clarity. How many times have you been there for someone who never was there for you? How many times have you confused loyalty with exhaustion? How many times have you kept a relationship alive because of shared history, even though the present leaves you empty? Not out of guilt, but out of habit. Not out of love, but out of fear of accepting that this bond never truly held you. Recognizing that isn't betrayal. It's a return to yourself. It's no longer justifying the intermittent presence of someone who only appears when they need something, but never when you're falling. Because that, too, is a form of hidden hate. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that doesn't see you. The kind that refuses to deal with your full humanity. And you, who have learned to see without fear, now know this isn't what you deserve. That love isn't giving without limits. That companionship isn't about emptying yourself for someone who doesn't know how to hold you. And when someone close shows affection only when you're useful, what they're truly showing is that your presence doesn't matter for who you are, but for what you represent to them. That truth, even when it hurts, sets you free. Because real love doesn't only show up when it's convenient. Real love stays even when it can't give. Even when you can't give. It stays simply because the soul feels it. And if that presence disappears when you fall, then what you had was never love. It was ego dressed up as closeness, shadow wrapped in courtesy. And finally, your soul has learned to see the difference. Sign 3. They make fun of you jokingly, but always aim where it hurts. There's a very specific kind of disguised aggression that only someone who knows you well can pull off. The kind that hides behind humor. That close person drops light comments, supposedly harmless, but they always manage to hit a sensitive nerve. They laugh at your struggles, downplay what matters to you, mock your changes, your decisions, your most personal transformations. And when you notice it, when something inside you shrinks, there's always a way out waiting. It was just a joke. But your body doesn't feel it that way, because it's not what is said, it's where it comes from. And that kind of mockery doesn't come from intimacy. It comes from resentment. It's not meant to connect. It's meant to cut. It's not there to laugh with you. It's crafted to make you feel like you shouldn't take yourself too seriously, that you shouldn't believe in yourself so much, that even your most valuable steps are still laughable. At first, you don't see it clearly. You even laugh with them because the comment comes wrapped in familiarity, in that tone that makes everything feel like part of a harmless game. But something inside you doesn't laugh. A subtler part, more sensitive, shrinks. And it's not that you lack a sense of humor. It's that you know every joke has a weight, an intent, an edge. And the person throwing it knows exactly where to cut. These aren't spontaneous jokes. These are words that show up right when you're opening up, talking about your goals, your fears, your growth. And instead of support, you get irony, as if your progress were exaggerated, as if your emotions were a performance, as if your wounds weren't valid enough to deserve respect. You start to realize it when you try to talk about it, and the response is defensive. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. You're blowing things out of proportion. But you know it's not an isolated thing. It's a pattern, a way of communicating that hides contempt under a laugh, that throws darts disguised as affection, but always aiming to belittle you. And you, who have learned to tune into your energy, feel it. There's something dishonest behind that tone. What makes it more complex is that it comes from someone close, someone who, by being so near, has access to your cracks. And that's what makes it more painful, because what seems like a harmless joke is actually a reminder that your vulnerability is not safe there, that your most intimate parts are being used as ammunition to mask what they're too afraid to say out loud. Often, this kind of hostility isn't even recognized as such, not even by the one expressing it. It's a projection of their shadow, repressed envy, unmanaged insecurity, resentment that can't be openly expressed because it would break the bond. So it slips in as sarcasm, as double-edged laughter. And you, who no longer deny what you feel, begin to fall silent. You no longer share with the same freedom. You no longer open up with the same innocence, because you've realized that this closeness isn't a refuge, it's a minefield. The relationship becomes a space where you must measure your words, protect your excitement, soften your joy, because any step forward might become the next punchline. Not because you've done something wrong, but because your light exposes the unacknowledged darkness of the other. Instead of being inspired, they defend themselves, and that defense takes the form of ridicule, a laugh that isn't laughter, but a mechanism. This signal is one of the hardest to accept, because the doubt always lingers. Maybe I am exaggerating, but when every encounter leaves behind a strange echo, when every joke leaves a scratch, when every smile feels heavier than it should, then you're not misreading it. You're in a connection that's starting to wound you in disguise. And that, no matter how much it's dressed up as closeness, is a form of emotional rejection. Carl Jung knew this. Everything we refuse to recognize in ourselves, we project onto others. And someone who hasn't embraced their shadow often tries to dim the light of someone who has begun to. When that dynamic hides behind humor, it becomes even more insidious. But you feel it, and feeling it is the first step to protecting yourself. Because your truth is not a punchline. Your process is not a joke. Your sensitivity is not too much. It's your compass, and it's clearly showing you where you're no longer safe, even if it still looks like you are. With time, you stop laughing just to be polite. Not because you've lost your joy, but because you're no longer willing to participate in your own diminishing. You start noticing that behind every "just kidding," there's a deeper message. Don't be fully yourself. Don't shine so brightly. Don't show what you feel so openly. And you realize that's not humor. It's control. Control disguised as closeness, meant to keep you small so they don't feel uncomfortable. The person making these comments might even seem affectionate. They might do you favors, be there at times, and that's what's most confusing. Because this isn't a declared enemy, it's a hidden wound, a projected shadow, and it only shows itself when you let your guard down, when you share something real from your soul. Then, instead of an embrace, you get a smirk. Instead of validation, you get sarcasm. And there's no place lonelier than opening up to someone who will use your truth as entertainment. That's when you understand not every connection deserves access to your intimacy. Some people simply aren't ready to honor your growth, your sensitivity, your depth, because deep down, they haven't allowed themselves to feel that within themselves. And so when you do, they mock it, not out of conscious malice, but because they don't know how else to respond. Because your journey becomes too clear a mirror of what they're not ready to see. Real affection never laughs at what hurts you. It never belittles your changes. It never turns your inner path into a sarcastic story. Mature love is careful, even in the way it jokes, because it knows that humor can be a bridge or a wound. And someone who truly knows you, who truly stands with you, doesn't cross that line again and again, using the excuse of, "That's just how I am." When you stop smiling out of obligation, when you begin creating emotional distance without needing to explain yourself, when you start withdrawing your trust without a scene, just because your body no longer feels safe, that's when you're choosing your truth over old habits. And that, too, is an act of love, not toward them, but toward yourself, because your process deserves respect. Your journey needs no defense. And if someone close uses their proximity to hurt you through humor, then that's not closeness, it's a disguise. And your soul, already trained to see what goes unspoken, knows it. So it begins to walk away, not with rage, but with dignity, because there is nothing more sacred than protecting your truth in the place where it most deserves to be honored. Sign 5. You feel a deep sense of relief when that person isn't around. It's not something easy to explain, but your body knows it before your mind does. When they're absent, when they don't text, miss a meeting, or simply aren't near, you breathe differently. It's as if the air becomes lighter, as if energy flows freely again, as if your inner state returns to center without resistance. That relief isn't shallow. It's a quiet signal that your emotional system was on high alert near that person, even if you didn't consciously know it. You spent a long time trying to justify it. You told yourself it was stress, that you were too sensitive, that you needed to get along better. But your body doesn't lie. Every time that presence disappears, something inside you softens. Sometimes, without noticing, you start smiling, speaking more freely, moving more naturally. And it's no coincidence. It's your soul recognizing that it's no longer under surveillance. Because some people don't need to tell you they're judging you. They do it with silence, with looks, with the way they tense up when you talk about your achievements or share something emotional. And you feel it. You've always felt it. But since there was no concrete evidence, you denied it, until the day the contrast becomes too obvious to ignore. You feel better when they're not around, more like yourself, freer, more at peace. And that's when everything becomes clear. You don't need arguments, yelling, or drama. Sometimes the deepest discomfort reveals itself in the invisible, in the constant unease you feel around someone, even when everything seems fine on the surface. And when that happens, your soul doesn't need more explanations. It just needs permission to walk away. That permission comes from you, not from resentment, but from clarity. Because real love doesn't weigh you down, doesn't suffocate, doesn't feel like emotional surveillance. Real love gives space. And if someone close to you, instead of giving you space to be, fills you with unease every time they come near, then what they offer isn't love. It's a form of control disguised as connection. Listening to that relief, recognizing it, and acting accordingly is one of the greatest acts of spiritual maturity you can experience, because it's choosing not to force yourself into places where your energy doesn't flow. It's trusting how you feel, even if you can't fully explain it. It's choosing your peace over loyalty to what hurts in silence. Because your soul no longer wants to survive relationships. It wants to live them in truth. And when you finally give voice to that relief you used to ignore, something deep begins to shift within you. You start looking back with new eyes. You remember moments that once seemed insignificant, now clear as emotional warnings you couldn't decode at the time. That time Your excitement faded right after sharing something with that person. That day, their silence wasn't neutral. It felt like punishment. That conversation, where for no reason you could name, you felt lonelier with them than when you're alone. All of it returns, not to make you suffer, but to help you understand. Understand that some forms of affection don't heal. They just uphold an image. That some bonds don't accept you. They only tolerate what doesn't disturb them. And you, with your sensitivity, you felt it all, but also learned to adapt, to stay quiet so as not to upset anyone, to pretend for the sake of peace. Until now. Now you know that real emotional well-being isn't built on denial. It's built on vibrational honesty, on the ability to truly feel how you are when you're with someone. Beyond labels and family ties, beyond what others expect from you. When someone close secretly resents you, you won't always see it in their actions, but you'll feel it. In that subtle anxiety you can't explain, in the constant urge to justify yourself, in how hard it is to be spontaneous. And that quiet discomfort, repeated over time, slowly drains you without you noticing. Until one day, you walk away, and everything becomes clear. That kind of clarity doesn't come from the mind. It comes from the soul. And once it arrives, it can't be ignored. This isn't about hating the other person or seeking emotional justice. It's about choosing yourself, even if that disappoints those who never truly knew how to love you. Because your light wasn't born to beg for approval. It was born to shine where it can be seen without fear. And once you recognize that, everything begins to realign. And that's when you realize your intuition was never broken. You were just taught to mistrust it. Because living with someone who hides their rejection behind a mask of affection forces you to constantly question yourself, to think you're the problem, that you're overreacting, imagining things, being unfair. But you weren't. What you felt was real. What you perceived was true. You had just gotten used to living with an emotional distortion so subtle it hurt without leaving a trace. The shadow, as Carl Jung would say, doesn't always show up as obvious evil. Sometimes it hides in disguised envy, in support with conditions, in a presence that feels more like monitoring than companionship. And out of loyalty, out of habit, out of love, you learned to call that a relationship. But deep down, you always knew something wasn't right. Now, you no longer need external proof. You no longer need the other person to admit their hatred or change their behavior, because what's changed is how you feel about yourself. You've broken the cycle of self-justification that kept you close to someone who hurt you. You understand now that the soul doesn't protect itself with excuses. It protects itself with boundaries. And even if the grief is silent, even if the distance hurts more when it involves someone close, there's something even more painful. Continuing to deny what can no longer be hidden. Because love doesn't mean allowing everything, and your light is something you can no longer dim. It's pulling you further and further away from everything that once made you doubt it. That's the true beginning of your healing. The courage to face what hurts without covering it up. The decision to prioritize your well-being, even if the other person doesn't understand. The certainty that your energy deserves to grow in peace, not in a silent war. Because when someone secretly hates you, what they fear most is that you'll stop doubting yourself. And that moment has now come. Thank you for reading this far. If even a small part of what you just heard resonated with you, don't ignore it. That subtle inner voice that recognized the truth in these words is no coincidence. It's part of your own light, trying to speak to you, gently reminding you that you are ready to see things differently. In a world that constantly teaches us to repress our emotions, to numb our pain, to pretend we're okay when we're not, daring to feel, to listen, and to be honest with ourselves is nothing short of an act of courage. And more than that, it's an act of self-love. When something stirs inside you, even if it's just a whisper, it's because a part of you already knows the way. You are not broken, you are not lost, you are awakening. And awakening isn't always pretty or easy. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's confusing, but it's real, it's raw, and it's yours. If this message came to you just when you needed it most, take it as a sign, not from me, but from your own soul. A sign that you are not alone, that there is a place where you are seen, where your depth is not excessive, where your emotions are not something that can be fixed, but something that can be understood. That place lives within you, but also here, in this space we are creating together. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. This channel is not about noise, it's about presence. Each video is carefully crafted for souls like yours, souls brave enough to look within, ask the hard questions, break old patterns, and soften to their truth. Here, you will always find words that comfort, truths that awaken, and insights that heal. Not because they come from outside, but because they remind you of what you already carried within. This is not just a message, it's an invitation to come home, to yourself. And if you're still listening, perhaps you're ready to remember who you are, ready to live with more intention, more honesty, and more connection. Thank you for being here. You are not alone. What if I told you that the desperation you feel when someone walks away is not love, but an ancient wound crying out for attention? In the next few minutes, you will discover why trying to control in order not to be abandoned is exactly what guarantees loneliness, and how healing that wound through compassion can completely transform the quality of your connections. If you stay with me for 3 minutes, you'll understand why Carl Jung said that our most stormy relationships are perfect mirrors of our unhealed parts. The wound of abandonment does not begin when someone leaves. It begins much earlier, in those childhood moments where you learned that your worth depended on how useful, obedient, or perfect you could be in order to keep the important people from disappearing from your life. The child you once were developed a survival strategy, controlling every possible variable to make sure love didn't slip through your fingers. But what once worked for survival is now destroying you. Every time you obsessively check your phone, waiting for a reply, every time you over-explain to avoid a misunderstanding, every time you betray your own boundaries to keep the peace, you're operating from that wound. You are not loving. You are begging for safety. And the cruel paradox is that the more you try to control, to avoid abandonment, the more you suffocate the spontaneity and freedom that allow love to bloom. Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. When it bothers you that your partner needs space, when you panic because a friend doesn't answer right away, when you interpret every silence as rejection, it's not about the other, it's your shadow speaking, the part of you that never learned to be at peace with itself. Think about the last time you felt that sting of panic when someone took too long to respond. Your mind created 10 catastrophic scenarios. They're angry, they're losing interest, they're with someone else. But notice what you didn't consider, that maybe they were simply busy living their own life. Your wound doesn't allow you to see neutral realities, only threats. Here's an exercise that will change your perspective. The next time you feel that anxiety of abandonment, instead of reacting right away, do this. Step 1. Breathe deeply and recognize my wound has been triggered. Step 2. Ask yourself what that wounded child inside needed to hear. Step 3. Give it to yourself. Repeat, I am safe, I am valuable, I deserve love, I don't have to beg. Step 4. From that inner calm, decide if you truly need to act or if you can simply hold the space. Step 5. Act from wholeness, not from lack. Feel the energetic difference between reacting from the wound and responding from integrity. That difference decides whether your relationships are built on quicksand or solid rock. Compassion toward your wound doesn't mean justifying destructive behavior. It means understanding that behind every desperate attempt to control is an inner child who once learned it wasn't safe to trust. Jung knew that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires integrating these wounded aspects of ourselves with radical compassion. When you can look at your abandonment wound not as something that defines you, but as a part of your story that needs healing, everything changes. You stop being a victim of automatic reactions and become the conscious healer of your own psyche. And from that place of inner strength, your relationships transform because you're no longer asking to be saved. You're sharing from your wholeness. But here comes the deepest challenge. The abandonment wound is not healed by finding someone who never leaves. It heals by developing such inner solidity that you can love without clinging, give without emptying yourself, commit without losing who you are. Jung called this individuation, becoming a complete individual who can choose intimacy from freedom, not from need. If this resonates with you and you feel something stirring inside, subscribe, because in the next videos, we'll go deeper into building that inner solidity that transforms not only your relationships, but your connection with yourself. The second revelation you must understand is that your abandonment wound feeds on a toxic fantasy. The idea that there is someone out there whose love will complete you so perfectly that you'll never again feel that existential anxiety. It's the fantasy of the rescuer, the perfect soulmate, the relationship that finally fills the void you've carried all your life. But Jung saw it differently. Your partner, your friends, your family did not come into this world to heal your wound. They came to be mirrors, to trigger exactly what you need to see in yourself in order to grow. When you project onto another the responsibility to make you feel safe, you turn them into a hostage of your healing process. And hostages always look for a way out. Projection is one of the most powerful and destructive mechanisms of the psyche. When you cannot tolerate aspects of yourself, you project them onto others and then chase or reject them there. If you cannot tolerate your own capacity for abandonment, you become hypervigilant to any sign that the other might leave. If you cannot accept your own need for space, you interpret the other's need for space as rejection. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your wound, when it operates unconsciously, creates exactly the situations you fear the most. You become so hungry for reassurance that you overwhelm, so afraid of loss that you cling, so desperate for control that you suffocate the freedom love needs to breathe. Imagine this. Someone close to you says they need a night for themselves. Your wound immediately interprets this as they don't love me enough. They're losing interest. They're probably with someone else. From that wounded interpretation, you react with interrogation, emotional drama, or subtle manipulation. But what if you could hear that request from a different place? Here's the exercise that will revolutionize your way of relating. When you feel your wound triggered by another's need for space, do this. Step 1. Pause before reacting and connect with your breath. Step 2. Recognize quietly, my wound is triggered, but this is not about me. Step 3. Ask yourself what this person needs to feel whole. Step 4. From your heart, not your wound, respond with generosity. Repeat, I trust this love. I trust this person. I trust myself. Step 5. Use that time apart to nourish your own wholeness. Notice how this response creates connection instead of distance. When you answer with trust instead of fear, you give the other freedom to choose you consciously, not to stay out of guilt or pressure. And the beautiful paradox is that when you stop desperately chasing security in relationships, when you can hold uncertainty with grace, when you love from wholeness instead of lack, you become magnetic in a completely different way. People feel safe to be authentic with you because they don't have to take care of your wound while managing their own life. Jung understood that the deepest relationships don't arise when two wounded people cling to each other, but when two individuals in the process of individuation consciously choose to create something together. Not from need, but from abundance. Not from fear of abandonment, but from the celebration of mutual choice. Yet healing the wound of abandonment requires doing something your nervous system interprets as dangerous. Learning to be alone with yourself without collapsing into anxiety. You must develop the ability to stand in uncertainty, to find fullness in your own company, to trust your capacity to be okay no matter what others do. And that leads us to the next insight. The third truth that will transform your understanding is that the abandonment wound does not heal by filling the void with people, activities, or distractions. It heals by learning to inhabit that void with compassionate presence until you discover it was never a void to be filled, but a sacred space to be honored. Jung knew that at the heart of every neurosis is the flight from suffering, but he also knew that at the heart of healing is the ability to stay present with what hurts. When you feel that sting of abandonment, your automatic impulse is to seek immediate relief. Send another message, call someone, scroll endlessly, drown in work, anything not to feel that raw loneliness. But every time you run from that sensation, you reinforce the belief that it's intolerable, that you really do need someone else to be okay. The most liberating truth you can discover is that you can feel the sting of abandonment and still be whole. You can experience the anxiety of separation and still remain intact. You can touch that primal loneliness and discover that on the other side of resistance, there is a sacred solitude that doesn't need to be rescued. Jung observed that loneliness does not come from not having people around, but from the inability to communicate the things that matter to you. But there's an even deeper layer to this truth. The loneliness that hurts the most is not the lack of someone to share your thoughts with, but the disconnection from your own essence, the abandonment of the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. The wound of abandonment is, at its core, the result of abandoning yourself to keep the love and approval of others. Every time you betrayed your truth to avoid conflict, every time you gave up your boundaries to maintain peace, every time you made yourself small so others would feel comfortable, you abandoned yourself. And now, you project this pattern of self-abandonment into your relationships, fearing others will do to you what you have been doing to yourself for years. Here's the most powerful exercise to heal this dynamic. When you feel your wound triggered, instead of seeking external relief, do this. Step 1. Sit in silence and locate the sensation in your body without judgment. Step 2. Breathe into that sensation and say, I see you. I accept you. You don't have to protect me anymore. Step 3. Ask that wounded part what it needs to hear from you. Step 4. From your wise adult self, give it the words of love and safety it's been waiting for all its life. Repeat, I will never abandon you. I will always be here for you. You are worthy of unconditional love. Step 5. Stay present with that part until you feel a softening, a relaxation in your nervous system. Feel how this returns your power. Instead of depending on others to regulate your nervous system, you develop the ability to be your own safe refuge. This doesn't mean you don't need relationships or that you should become an emotional island. It means that when you relate from fullness instead of lack, when you can offer yourself the security you've been looking for in others, your connections become conscious choices instead of desperate dependencies. Individuation, according to Jung, is not about becoming independent of others, but about developing such inner solidity that you can choose interdependence from strength, not from need. You can commit deeply because you are not asking the relationship to save you. You are offering your wholeness in service of something greater. When you can hold your own wound of abandonment with radical compassion, something miraculous happens. You stop triggering that wound in others. Your inner peace becomes a field of healing that allows the people around you to relax their defenses and show up more authentically. If you've made it this far and feel something moving deeply within, comment individuation so the algorithm knows this content is serving you and can show you more tools for your inner healing. Jung understood that behind every wound there is a gift waiting to be discovered. The wound of abandonment, when healed consciously, transforms into an extraordinary capacity for compassion, empathy, and authentic connection. Those who have navigated their own pain of abandonment with awareness become safe spaces where others can deposit their vulnerability without fear. But this transformation requires that you stop seeing your wound as something that defines you and begin to see it as something that teaches you. The fourth revelation that will change your relationship with abandonment is to understand that your wound is not your identity, but your wisest teacher. All this time, you have been fighting against it, trying to suppress it, control it, or escape from it. But Jung had a radically different perspective. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. Your wound of abandonment contains vital information about what your soul is asking for. It is not there to torture you. It is there to guide you toward a fuller and more authentic version of yourself. Every time it is activated, it shows you where you still need to develop inner strength, where you are still giving away your power, where you need to set clearer boundaries or deepen your relationship with yourself. The wound of abandonment is like an inner alarm system that goes off when it detects relational patterns that replicate dynamics from your unresolved past. But instead of seeing that alarm as something wrong with you, you can begin to see it as your inner guide saying, "Pay attention, you are operating from old programming. It's time to choose a more conscious response." Carl Jung observed that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your wound of abandonment is part of your personal shadow. Those aspects of yourself you have rejected or denied because you perceive them as unacceptable. But when you illuminate that shadow with compassionate awareness, you discover that it holds not only pain, but also wisdom, strength, and abilities you didn't know you had. The one who has lived the terror of abandonment develops an extraordinary sensitivity to perceive the emotional needs of others. The one who has had to create safety from insecurity develops a resilient capacity to navigate uncertainty. The one who has touched the deepest loneliness develops a genuine appreciation for authentic connection. But to access these gifts, you must stop fighting with your wound and start dialoguing with it. This requires a fundamental shift in your relationship with your own pain, from enemy to ally, from something to be eliminated to something to be integrated. The first step, when you feel the wound activate, instead of resisting it, welcome it. Say, "Hello, wound. I see you. What are you here to teach me today?" The second step, listen without judgment to what arises. Maybe fear of not being enough. Maybe anger for feeling invisible. Maybe sadness over lost loves. The third step, ask your wound what gift it is trying to give you through this experience. The fourth step, look for the hidden wisdom. Maybe greater discernment in relationships. Maybe clearer boundaries. Maybe deeper compassion. Repeat, my wound is my teacher. My pain is my portal. My vulnerability is my strength. The fifth step, act from that integrated wisdom, not from automatic reaction. Do you feel the difference between resisting your wound and collaborating with it? When you work with your wound instead of against it, it becomes fuel for your evolution. Jung understood that the process of individuation does not consist in eliminating our wounds, but in developing a conscious relationship with them, where they serve our growth instead of sabotaging it. The wound of abandonment, when integrated, becomes an inner compass that guides you toward more authentic relationships and away from dynamics that do not honor your worth. When you can hold your wound of abandonment without collapsing into it, you develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites without taking sides. You can love deeply and also hold the possibility of loss. You can commit fully and also honor your need for autonomy. You can be vulnerable and also maintain your dignity. This ability to hold paradoxes is what allows you to create mature relationships where two whole people choose to build something together, not where two incomplete people cling to each other, hoping to find wholeness. The wound of abandonment, when healed, teaches you that you can survive loss, thrive in solitude, and choose love from abundance. But there is an even deeper dimension to this transformation. When you integrate your wound of abandonment consciously, you not only heal your relationship with others, but you heal your relationship with life itself. You develop the ability to trust the process of existence, to embrace uncertainty as a space of possibility, to see losses as redirections towards something more aligned with your truth. Your wound of abandonment has been your harshest teacher, but it can also become your most powerful ally if you learn to listen to its wisdom instead of running from its pain. The fifth and most liberating realization is that healing the wound of abandonment does not mean guaranteeing that you will never again experience loss, rejection, or loneliness. It means developing such depth of connection with yourself that you can navigate these inevitable human experiences from integrity, not from despair. Jung knew that the goal of individuation is not to eliminate suffering, but to transform our relationship with it. The fear of abandonment keeps you in a constant struggle against the impermanence of life. You try to control uncontrollable variables, create guarantees in an uncertain universe, secure permanence in a world where everything is in constant change. But this struggle exhausts you and paradoxically distances you from the presence that would make every moment of connection deeper and more meaningful. When you can accept that loss is an integral part of the human experience, something radical happens. You stop wasting the present by worrying about the future. You stop contaminating current love with anxieties about its possible end. You allow yourself to experience the fullness of every encounter without the shadow of fear, darkening the beauty of what is happening now. Jung wrote, "Life truly lived is a constant confrontation with the soul." Your wound of abandonment has been confronting you with aspects of your soul that need to be seen, honored, and integrated. The fear of being alone confronts you with the need to develop an intimate relationship with yourself. The fear of rejection confronts you with the need to accept yourself unconditionally. The fear of loss confronts you with the precious temporal nature of all bonds. Healing does not come when you eliminate these fears, but when you develop the capacity to hold them without letting them direct your life. You can feel the fear of abandonment and still act from love. You can recognize insecurity and still maintain your boundaries. You can touch loneliness and still celebrate your wholeness. This is the difference between being controlled by your wound and having a conscious relationship with it. When you are being controlled, every relational decision is contaminated by fear. You avoid necessary conflicts to not risk the connection. You give up important boundaries to keep peace. You explain yourself obsessively to avoid misunderstandings. You sacrifice your authenticity at the altar of relational safety. But when you have a conscious relationship with your wound, you can feel the fear and still choose authenticity. You can recognize the impulse to control and still choose trust. You can touch the anxiety of abandonment and still choose vulnerability. When you face a situation that activates your wound of abandonment, do this. First step, breathe deeply and say, "My wound is activated, and that's okay." Second step, connect with your body and locate where you feel the activation. Third step, ask yourself, if I acted from my integrity instead of my wound, what would I do? Fourth step, visualize yourself acting from that integrity and notice how it feels in your body. Repeat, I can feel fear and still choose love. I can touch insecurity and still hold my truth. I can experience loneliness and still celebrate my wholeness. Fifth step, act from that vision, not from automatic reaction. Feel the power of choosing your response instead of being a victim of your automatic reactions. This is the freedom Jung called individuation, the ability to respond to life from your conscious center instead of from your unconscious patterns. When you heal the wound of abandonment, you do not become invulnerable to relational pain. You become resilient to it. You do not eliminate the possibility of loss, but you develop the capacity to find meaning and growth in every experience, including losses. You do not guarantee that everyone will stay, but you ensure that no matter what happens, you never abandon yourself. True security does not come from controlling the behavior of others, but from trusting your ability to navigate whatever life brings. True stability does not come from relationships that never change, but from a connection with yourself that remains constant through all changes. True fullness does not come from finding someone who fills your emptiness, but from discovering that you were never empty, only disconnected from your own inner abundance. Jung understood that the deepest purpose of our wounds is to guide us back home, to ourselves. Your wound of abandonment has been a harsh but wise compass, pointing you toward the need to develop an unbreakable relationship with yourself. When that relationship is solid, all other relationships become expressions of abundance, rather than desperate attempts to fill lack. The healing of the wound of abandonment is a return to the deepest home, the recognition that you have never truly been alone because you have always had the companionship of your own soul. And from that intimate companionship with yourself, you can choose to connect with others from mutual celebration rather than mutual need. In the end, you discover that what you thought was your greatest vulnerability, your capacity to be wounded by abandonment, was in fact your greatest gift, a profound sensitivity that, when integrated consciously, allows you to create bonds of extraordinary depth, because only those who have touched the deepest loneliness can truly appreciate the miracle of authentic connection. Your wound of abandonment has taught you about the value of presence, about the precious temporal nature of every encounter, about the importance of showing your truth while you can, about the courage it takes to love without guarantees. These are not wounds that need to be eliminated, but wisdom that needs to be integrated. When you can hold your wound of abandonment with radical compassion, you become a safe space where others can place their own vulnerability. When you can love without clinging, you inspire others to do the same. When you can be alone without collapsing, you give others permission to also find their own inner strength. The healing of the wound of abandonment is not a destination you arrive at, but a practice you cultivate. Every time you choose trust over control, every time you respond from integrity instead of fear, every time you remain present with your pain without seeking immediate relief, you are not only healing your own wound, but also contributing to the collective healing of this ancestral wound carried by so many. If you have come this far, you are no longer the same person who began this journey with me. Something within you has shifted, something has softened, something has been illuminated in the depths of your being. The wound of abandonment that once hid in silence, as your secret jailer, has begun to reveal itself, not as a source of endless suffering, but as a conscious guide that points you toward more authentic relationships and a more fulfilling way of living. Where once there was fear, now there is awareness. Where once there was a sense of being trapped, now there is the possibility of freedom. This transformation is subtle, yet profound, like the quiet movement of roots beneath the earth that slowly but inevitably make space for a new tree to rise toward the light. What you are experiencing is not simply healing in the conventional sense, but a profound reorganization of your inner world. Abandonment has long been a shadow for many, a silent wound carried through the years, shaping choices, desires, and even the way love is given and received. Yet when you dare to face it, when you allow yourself to see it not as a curse, but as a teacher, something extraordinary begins to happen. That pain that once seemed unbearable becomes the very material from which your inner strength is forged. You start to realize that your ability to connect deeply with others, your capacity for empathy, and your hunger for authenticity were born precisely from that wound. It is as if the very thing that tried to break you is the same thing that now grants you access to a deeper understanding of yourself. And in that understanding, you begin to relate differently not only to those around you, but also to your own inner being. You no longer run from your vulnerability. Instead, you begin to honor it, to listen to it, to let it speak. Vulnerability becomes your compass, your path toward truth, guiding you away from shallow masks and into genuine connections where your essence is finally seen and felt. This is why the process you are living through matters so deeply. It is not just about overcoming a personal struggle. It is about transmuting the very energy of your pain into a force of creation. Each time you choose to face your shadow instead of hiding from it, you are reclaiming fragments of yourself that had been lost. Each time you integrate what once terrified you, you expand your sense of wholeness. And every step you take in this direction is not only a gift to your own growth, but also a gift to those who cross paths with you, because your presence becomes healing. Your words carry weight, and your energy begins to reflect authenticity rather than fear. So I invite you to reflect on how this process is transforming the way you relate, first to yourself, in the way you treat your own emotions, your body, your soul, and then to others, in the way you listen, in the way you love, in the way you set boundaries, and allow intimacy to unfold. Notice how the old patterns of needing approval or fearing rejection are slowly giving way to something more real, more grounded, more free. You are learning that your worth was never dependent on being abandoned or accepted by someone else. It was always within you, waiting to be remembered. And as you continue walking this path, remember that the journey of individuation, as Carl Jung called it, is only just beginning. The integration of your shadow is not a single moment, but an unfolding process, a lifelong exploration of all that you are. Every week, every day, every breath becomes an opportunity to embody more of your truth, to embrace the parts of yourself that were once denied, and to allow that integration to ripple outward into the world around you. This is why I encourage you to stay connected, to keep exploring the depths of the human psyche, and to keep discovering how the wounds that once defined you can be transformed into the greatest sources of your strength. Subscribe, stay present, and open yourself to receiving more practical tools of healing grounded in Jung's wisdom, because this is not the end of your journey. It is only the beginning. The steps you take from here will not only shape your own path, but will also touch the lives of those who are fortunate enough to encounter you. Your healing is not just personal, it is collective. Each moment of integration within you becomes a light that others can recognize and draw strength from. And in that way, your path becomes not only a personal transformation, but also a silent act of service to the world. How many times have you felt rejected without truly understanding why, carrying that invisible ache that follows you quietly, even when everything on the surface seems perfectly fine? Have you ever wondered whether the person you are today was born from your true will or from the wounds you tried so hard to hide? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will continue directing your life, and you will simply call it destiny. What you are about to hear is not just another message. It is a calling, a journey that enters the deepest corridors of your psyche, a descent into the hidden chambers where that part of you still lives, the part that never fully grew, the young child who still cries from within. Even when you smile on the outside, you carry that silent presence inside. Each of us wears masks, the strong one, the logical one, the mature one who supposedly has everything under control. But who would you become if you allowed that child to speak? If instead of silencing that voice, you listened to it with the same tenderness you would offer to someone you love deeply? This message is for the person who is exhausted from running away from themselves, for the one who senses an emptiness they cannot name, for the one who wants more than quick answers and seeks deeper meaning. From this moment on, every word will act as a key. Every idea will serve as a mirror. Every pause will be an invitation to return to yourself. Take a slow breath, close your eyes for a moment, and come with me. You know that feeling of always being on alert, even when everything appears calm, as if something inside you is constantly on the verge of falling apart, even while you keep smiling for the world. That inner tension has a name, and it is not weakness nor exaggeration. It is the young child still living inside you. Carl Jung offered one of the most challenging yet liberating ideas in depth psychology. Within every adult lives a child that has never died. Not a memory, not a metaphor, but a real psychic presence. This inner child thinks, feels, reacts, and flinches in ways you might not even notice. Most people believe childhood is just a chapter left behind, a closed section of a book that no longer affects them. Yet the truth is that for many, that chapter is still open, and its pages, though silent, continue to scream. The inner child is not simply nostalgia for simpler times. It is the source of both your creativity and your despair, your love for life and your fear of abandonment. Think about all the times you were upset over seemingly small criticisms, all the times you felt an unexplained emptiness, even when surrounded by people, all the times you silently begged for approval. These are not the whims of an unstable adult. They are echoes from a wounded child trying desperately to be heard. Jung observed this deeply in his patients. Adult suffering often grows from the attempt to hide, deny, or suffocate that inner child. But she does not vanish. She simply retreats behind the many masks life forced you to wear. The capable one, the strong one, the one who pretends to have overcome everything. Behind every anxious spiral, behind every self-sabotaged relationship, behind every moment when you feel like you don't belong anywhere, there she is, the child who learned far too early that feeling was dangerous, that trusting meant pain, that crying was shameful. This child, and perhaps you sense this without knowing how to explain it, was never healed. Not because she is weak, but because she was never truly seen. That is why adults explode with anger over minor rejections. That is why so many cannot say no without guilt. That is why countless people feel drained, always trying to prove they deserve love, as if love were something that must constantly be earned. But Jung invites us to a radical gesture. Instead of ignoring that child, look at her. Instead of covering her with silence, offer her words. Instead of judging her reactions, try to understand them. Because that child is not a mistake. She is your origin. And here lies one of the most delicate truths. She does not need to be fixed as if she were a problem. She needs to be welcomed as a real, integral part of who you are. When you stop treating your pain like a flaw, something begins to shift. You start realizing that your sensitivity is not a defect. It is a form of wisdom the world attempted to crush. And that realization becomes the first step towards something new, something that cannot be built with denial, but grows through reconciliation. The child within you has always been there, but maybe only now are you ready to listen. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever felt exhausted from trying so hard to change, yet never seeing real results? Have you read books, tried techniques, written down goals, pushed yourself again and again, only to watch everything collapse after a few days? There is a reason for this, and it has nothing to do with lack of discipline or lack of desire. Most people attempt to transform their lives without first understanding how the mind truly works. But there is a structured method, tested over centuries, that teaches you how to reorganize your thoughts, clarify your identity, and build emotional discipline without depending on fleeting motivation. This approach unites neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and practical philosophy. When applied consistently, it often marks a turning point. Those who commit to it describe a sense of mental order, internal peace, and self-mastery that once felt completely unattainable. They discover that transformation is not about force, it is about awareness. Not about perfection, it is about integration. Not about erasing the past, it is about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. And the moment you begin that process, your entire life subtly begins to shift. Your inner world becomes a place you can inhabit without fear. Your emotions stop feeling like storms and start becoming signals. And slowly, almost without noticing, you learn to walk through life with a strength that does not shout, but glows silently from within. Not every pain comes from the same wound, and not every inner child cries in the same way. Carl Jung observed in his clinical work that the archetype of the inner child appears in multiple forms, each carrying different needs, distortions, fears, and energetic patterns that shape the adult self. There is not just one child living inside you. There are many expressions of that subtle, invisible presence that quietly molds your deepest fears, your most impulsive reactions, and those emotional voids that feel urgent even when you don't understand why. These inner expressions live beneath layers of memory, silence, and instinct, influencing you far more than you consciously realize. The first expression is perhaps the most recognizable: the wounded child. She carries the explicit traumas you remember, but also the implicit ones, the ones buried so deeply that you no longer have access to their origin. She is the child who learned early on that expressing feelings was dangerous, that sensitivity was shameful, that vulnerability led to rejection. She discovered, long before she had words to explain it, that silence was safer than honesty. She survived by suppressing her emotional truth, holding her breath through moments that were too big, too loud, or too painful for her small heart to understand. Many times, she stayed quiet just to survive. And now, even in adulthood, you can still hear that silence. She shows herself when you feel the need to justify everything you do, when fear of rejection paralyzes your decisions, when you shrink inside relationships just to avoid being abandoned. The wounded child lives with fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of not being loved, fear of being seen, and paradoxically, fear of being ignored. She carries an ancient tension, a trembling expectation that something will go wrong, because in her world, things often did. The second expression is more subtle, but just as powerful. She is the eternal child, often referred to as the pure eternus. Unlike the wounded child who clings to the past, the eternal child escapes into possibility. She refuses to grow, avoids commitments, evades responsibility, and hides behind the rush of immediate pleasure. She thrives on novelty, intensity, and emotional fireworks. She seeks relationships that ignite quickly and burn out just as fast. She fears boredom, routine, and anything that demands consistency. But beneath her aversion to stability lies a deeper wound, the fear of losing a freedom she never truly had. She is constantly running, not toward a dream, but away from an invisible ache. Many adults dominated by the eternal child live in a constant state of anticipation, always feeling like they're on the edge of something extraordinary that never quite arrives. They start 1,000 projects and finish none. They fall into intense loves that dissolve as soon as things become real. They mistake intensity for presence, mistaking adrenaline for connection. But deep inside, they are running from themselves, from their fear of responsibility, from the weight of expectations, from the grief of becoming who they were never allowed to be. The third, and most forgotten expression, is the divine child. She represents the highest potential of your psyche, the part of you that carries pure intuition, unfiltered creativity, and the ability to love without fear. She is the spark within you that still believes in the mystery of life, the part that feels wonder in small things and can perceive beauty even in ruins. She is the whisper of hope, the quiet source of joy, the place where your authenticity lives untouched by trauma. Yet ironically, she is also the most silenced. The pain of the wounded child often drowns out her voice, and the chaos of the eternal child tends to overshadow her gentle presence. When the wounded child takes over, she screams. When the eternal child emerges, she runs. But the divine child, she becomes quiet. She withdraws, waiting patiently for a moment when she can exist without being overshadowed, judged, or extinguished. She waits for space to breathe, to create, to shine, without needing to hide. Jung believed that much of human suffering arises when the wounded child becomes the dominant force in our lives. When she governs our decisions, our lives become a repetition of the old emotional scripts of childhood. We look for in our partners the embrace we never received. We respond to criticism as if it were a lethal attack. We recreate in small, everyday decisions the same abandonment that once broke us. We think we are living in the present, but emotionally, we are reliving the past. Recognizing these three expressions is not simply an intellectual exercise, it is an act of liberation. Because the moment you can identify which child is holding the steering wheel of your life, you begin to take back your power. You stop being a prisoner of your impulses and start becoming a conscious witness of your inner world. Each expression carries an invitation. The wounded child invites you to heal. The eternal child invites you to take responsibility. The divine child invites you to create. And together, they form the full spectrum of who you are. To deny any of them is to live only half a life. Ignoring these manifestations does not make you more mature. It only fragments you further. You learn to wear masks to hide the chaos. You build a social persona that looks strong but trembles inside. And the more you try to appear normal, the more you feel like you are falling apart. But there is a path forward, and it begins with a simple decision: to stop running, to stop suppressing, to stop pretending, and to start listening. To listen to the pain that pulses, that insists, that rises again and again like a tide that refuses to retreat. Because pain, at its core, only wants one thing: to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be cared for. These three expressions of pain are not enemies. They are forgotten parts of you asking for a place to exist. And when you welcome them, gently, patiently, without judgment, something begins to shift. Not suddenly, not magically, but slowly, from the inside out. And for the first time, you may look at yourself and feel something unfamiliar, a sense of inner wholeness. Most of us grew up without an emotional manual. We learned early that feeling was dangerous, that depending on someone was wrong, that showing pain was a sign of weakness. And as a response, we became adults who know how to survive, but not how to take care of ourselves. Adults who know how to work, produce, and please, but who do not know how to hold themselves when they feel tired, insecure, or hurt. Carl Jung believed that true psychological maturity is not found in denying the inner child, but in developing within ourselves a new inner figure, something he described as the paternal ego, an internal father capable of offering protection, guidance, and love to the wounded part that continues to live inside us. And this inner figure, contrary to what many assume, does not appear naturally with age. It is not the result of growing older. It is the result of growing inward. It has to be built consciously, in the quiet space of our deepest choices, in the invisible moments where no one is watching, but the truth within us is speaking loudly. The paternal ego is that part of us that when pain rises, does not judge, but listens. When fear appears, it does not silence itself, but welcomes the trembling voice. When everything feels chaotic, instead of escaping, it stands firm and holds the ground inside us. It becomes the adult you always wished had been present, the one you never had, and the one you can finally become for yourself. Imagine a common situation. You are rejected, criticized, or ignored. The first reaction is almost always emotional, impulsive, a sudden desire to disappear, to defend yourself, or even to attack. But if you pause for a moment, breathe deeply, and listen with honesty, you might notice something profound. The one who is hurting in that moment is not the adult version of you. It is the child, the same one from years ago, the one who was once left alone, the one who never understood what was happening, the one who only wanted to be loved. It is in that exact moment that the paternal ego can emerge, offering a quiet but powerful inner presence that whispers, "I see you. I'm here. I will not abandon you." That small internal gesture changes everything, because it marks the moment you stop reacting automatically and begin responding consciously. Your pain is no longer in charge. Your awareness is. And that shift is not coldness. It is mature love. But building this inner father is not easy. It requires practice, courage, and a deep commitment to your emotional truth. Above all, it requires breaking the cycle of self-abandonment, the habit of silencing yourself to avoid conflict, of shrinking yourself to maintain relationships, of distracting yourself so you don't have to feel. Relearning how to become a parent to yourself is ultimately relearning how to stay, how to remain present with yourself. It means staying with yourself on the good days, but even more on the difficult ones. It means learning to say no when it is necessary. It means creating boundaries not to protect yourself from the world, but to protect the most sensitive part of your being, the part that was exposed too early, the part that learned to stay silent, the part that still trembles today when it senses rejection approaching. This entire process is known as reparenting, and it is not about returning to the past. It is about transforming the way the past still lives inside you today. It is offering your inner child what your caregivers could not or did not know how to offer you: attention, presence, safety, affection. It is telling that child not with empty promises, but with real and consistent actions. You no longer need to beg for love. I am here. I will care for you now. And this care expresses itself in small moments, in honoring your emotional boundaries, in refusing to abandon yourself when shame appears, in stopping the harsh internal criticism that treats you like an enemy, in taking a deep breath when pain surfaces and staying there with it, without running, without denying, without collapsing. Over time, something inside you begins to trust. The wounded child, once terrified, slowly starts lowering her defenses. She begins to notice that for the first time in her life, there is a real adult present, an adult who does not demand perfection, but offers comfort, an adult who does not try to erase the pain, but holds it with dignity. And it is in that sacred space where true healing begins. When your inner child finally realizes she is no longer alone, that someone inside you stays, listens and loves without asking her to become anything other than exactly what she already is. Ultimately, reparenting yourself is a process of rebuilding the relationship with your own heart. It is the daily commitment to reminding yourself that you deserve your own care. There comes a moment in life when pain stops being a burden and starts becoming strength. But this transformation does not happen in an explosive or dramatic way. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, the moment you stop fighting yourself. When instead of hiding your wounds, you begin to listen to them with respect, with presence, with compassion. For years, many of us believed that healing meant forgetting, that maturity meant becoming indifferent, that overcoming meant pretending that nothing affected us. And in the name of that false idea of strength, we abandoned ourselves, shutting down the voice of our inner child, suffocating her needs so we could appear invincible. But true strength is not found in becoming unbreakable. It is found in becoming whole, integrating what was once exiled, turning pain into awareness. Jung believed that the symbol of the child represents totality, which is why it cannot be denied. When you embrace your wounded inner child, you do not simply heal the past, you liberate your future. The energy you once used to hide your pain becomes the energy that now allows you to create, to love, to live with authenticity. The process feels like a rebirth, not mystical or idealized, but real and tangible. You start realizing that you no longer need to fit into roles to be accepted. You no longer need to shrink emotionally to earn love. You no longer need to run away from yourself, because now you finally have yourself. And that changes everything. When pain is listened to, it reveals what was hidden beneath it, the sensitivity that was silenced, the dream that was postponed, the part of you that you believed did not deserve to exist. And then suddenly, what was once a wound becomes a window. What was once a shadow becomes light. What once paralyzed you now propels you forward. It is in that space of inner reconciliation where the divine child, the forgotten third aspect of your being, begins to emerge. She does not shout, demand, or force her presence. She simply appears. And with her, creativity awakens, sensitivity flourishes, and your fascination with the mystery of life becomes alive again. Not because everything is perfect now, but because even in its imperfection, everything is finally yours, fully yours, and part of your unfolding story. The divine child is the one who dances even when there is no music, the one who believes even without evidence, the one who loves without guarantees. She is the naked heart of human existence, and when she feels truly safe, when she knows she will not be silenced again, she returns to you what you didn't even realize you had lost, the freedom to simply be. Jung often said that a person becomes real only when they become who they truly are. And what we truly are is an intricate weaving of all our parts, the pain and the potential, the shadow and the light, the fear and the hope. True freedom begins when you no longer need to fight yourself, when your inner child no longer has to scream to be heard, when your presence alone becomes enough, when you finally become the home you spent your entire life searching for in others. And this journey does not end here, because once you have seen what was hidden, you cannot unsee it. And once you have embraced what hurt, it begins to transform into power. In the end, healing is not about defeating pain. It is about listening to it until it feels safe enough to soften. It is about looking inward, and instead of seeing a battlefield, seeing fertile ground. Ground where wounds become roots, and from those roots, something new, something strong, something deeply alive can finally begin to grow. The little girl living inside you is not broken. She's simply tired. Tired of hiding, tired of shrinking herself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her. Tired of waiting for someone outside of her to finally offer the safety she always longed for. But today, perhaps for the very first time, she has been seen. Maybe now you can understand why certain emptiness inside you was never filled, why certain patterns repeated themselves over and over again, like a silent cry for help. A cry that didn't use words, but still echoed through every corner of your life. Carl Jung taught us that our goal is not to become perfect, but to become whole. And being whole means recognizing that within us live all our ages at once, every version of who we were, every fear we carried, every possibility waiting to be born. It means embracing the child, the adult, and the divine presence that all dance together inside the soul, weaving the story of who we are becoming. So if there is one thing you can take from this moment, let it be this truth. Wholeness begins the moment you allow all your inner voices to exist without shame. You no longer need to abandon yourself just to feel loved. You don't have to pretend to be strong so others will accept you. What you truly need, what you have always needed, is to stay with yourself, with courage, with gentleness, with presence. Healing isn't the end of pain. Healing is the beginning of a new relationship with it. Pain becomes less of an enemy and more of a messenger, something that doesn't come to destroy you, but to show you the places still waiting to be held. As I wrote this script, a memory from long ago rose to the surface. I was about 8 years old. I remember sitting alone in the patio of my grandmother's house, staring at a heavy grey sky filled with slow-moving clouds. I felt so small that day, so forgotten, as if the whole world was rushing forward and leaving me behind without ever noticing I was there. I remember wishing someone would sit beside me, someone who would simply see me without asking me to be anything other than what I was. And today, as I share these words with you, I realize that maybe, on some level, I've been writing from that moment ever since, trying to become for others what I needed so desperately on that quiet afternoon. If in any way this video reached you, if it touched something hidden, fragile, or tender inside your chest, then maybe my inner child finally managed to touch yours. And if that happened, then everything, all the time spent writing, feeling, remembering, was worth it. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for allowing this conversation to unfold between your silence and mine. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me step, even for a moment, into something so intimate, so delicate, so sacred. You could be anywhere else right now, lost in noise or distraction, but you chose to be inside yourself instead, and that alone is brave. That alone is a form of self-love. If this video spoke to you, don't keep it only for yourself. Give it a like, leave a comment, share it with someone who might need these words as much as you did. And of course, subscribe to the channel, not for me, but for you. Because this journey is just beginning, and you deserve to walk it with company, with guidance, with tenderness. And if you decide not to subscribe, that's okay too. But just know, your inner girl will be standing there with her arms crossed, looking at you quietly, judging you with that very specific look she has. And trust me, she can be demanding.